The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lauren and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Bridget. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
It's a good day. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the author of the upcoming novel, 1,000 Miles, as well as 3 other novels, Love Scenes, which is also a romance, and 2 YA novels, What You Left Me and When the Light Went Out.
I love this. And so what inspired you to write romance novels? Because that's a departure from YA.
Yeah, so my YA novels are pretty heavy. They're about grief and death and dying and all the exciting things in life. And I loved them and I'm so proud of them. But when I was done writing my second book, I really needed a change of pace. And I love romance. I love rom-coms as movies. I love them as books. So I found myself writing a romance novel and just loving it. And I'm so thrilled now to be in this genre and world.
I love this. So in terms of romance, you remember when you just started reading romance? Like what was your gateway read? Like what kind of genre did you gravitate to?
I don't. I know my mom used to have, she had Lady Chatterley's Lover, which I don't even know if that is a romance, but I just remember it so distinctly on her, like in the back of the bookshelf and just being like, what is that? And as a kid, just loving romance movies and just like always that being my favorite, my comfort watch and my go-to. And then as I got further along in my life and then also in my writing career, I sort of opened my eyes to the romance genre in a new perspective, realizing like, oh, it's bigger than ever, better than ever. And I could also be a part of it.
I love this. Oh, love this so much. So let's talk about 1,000 Miles. Tell us the elevator pitch.
So 1,000 Miles follows Dee and Ben, who are high school best friends that haven't spoken in a decade until Ben shows up at Dee's doorstep and asks her to go on a road trip with him, fulfilling a promise they made to each other 10 years ago before their friendship fell apart.
Okay, so I'm assuming you wrote this during the pandemic. So what was the process of writing this during the pandemic?
I sure did. I wrote this in the thick of it, like end of 2020, early 2021. So I wasn't seeing anyone. I was in my apartment all the time. And I like to go places when I write. I love to write at coffee shops or just be out and about. And I don't know, something about having people around me focuses me. So there's no one around me. So it was such a struggle. And I would do things like write in my bathtub and find myself like laying on my back on the couch with my legs up, just like holding my laptop to my face, just trying to make my apartment feel like anywhere other than my apartment to write this. But I loved the story. It was never the story. It was just everything else.
Yeah, trying to make sense because I'm like, you can't leave. You cannot even have a road trip for a research purpose, because you're supposed to be in this bubble. So
Exactly.
So Dee has a podcast. So are you a podcast listener or like how did that idea of having Dee having a podcast came about?
So I do listen to podcasts, but I listen to very niche podcasts. I am a gymnastics coach. So I listen to gymnastics podcasts all the time. And that's like my world of podcasts. So when I came up with the idea for Dee to do podcasts, I started listening to a lot of just like episodes of general relationship podcasts. All of the names are escaping me now. I would literally, my Spotify would just then start recommending them to me. So every time I would drive to the grocery store or just be out of my house, I would put one on. And I liked that medium because I love the vulnerability of conversation that can happen there, but there's still that distance of, you don't actually know this person, even though they're telling you absolutely everything about their life. They're also not. They're still just a person that you don't know. So I thought that was a really interesting job for a romance lead and for somebody who has this really weighty history with someone. And so Dee's history with Ben is the only thing she won't directly discuss on her podcast. She talks about absolutely everything else. And that just was a really fun medium to like include podcast excerpts and have her constantly tiptoeing around this one landmine, basically.
Which I love, because it's like you feel like you know the person, the listener, because you're like invested in their story over time. Like, and then the fact that there's like something hidden, like the audience is like, I want to know. And then you're like, but it's my secret. I don't want to talk about it.
That's the thing. Like secrets are so just innately interesting to us as people, and especially someone that you have so much access to and tells you everything else. It's like Dee has accidentally made her own worst nightmare in that she just can't help but bring Ben up in all these small ways. And that makes her listeners just want to know everything about him. And she doesn't want to discuss it, but she kind of ends up discussing it all the time as a result.
I love this. So let's see, what are you working next? Are you working on another romance or?
Yeah, I am. I think it's going to get announced very soon. So I can probably say a little bit about it so you could get the scoop. It is another adult romance. It's called That Summer Feeling, and it's about a recently divorced woman who goes to an adults only sleepaway camp for a week, where she thinks she's met the man of her dreams or been reunited with him, only to realize that she's falling for his sister instead. So it is sort of my homage in a very roundabout way to the misdirect that happens in the movie While You Were Sleeping, because the whole movie, Sandra Bullock's character thinks that she's meant to be with Peter Gallagher's character, but he's in a coma, and she gets to know his brother the whole time. And she realizes, oh, I like his brother. And I love that. It's one of my favorite movies. So that's what's coming up next for me. And I'm really excited about it.
Oh my gosh, an adult sleepaway camp. I love it.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that so fun? That's like one of my dreams. And they do exist. I've never been, but I kind of wanted to make one that was like, if an adult sleepaway camp was just like a kid's one, and it was just like sort of very pure hearted and like just adults up in the mountains being like, we have no connection to our outside life here. And I'm assuming, as I reflect on it, that was also like a pandemic response of like that return to the inner child and like finding the joy in hard times, and also just that wish to just be that free again. So it's been really fun.
That's really fun. I had two friends from my New York days. They did, I think one of them had a connection with her old camp. They met in camp and they ended up creating with that old camp as adult sleepaway camp for like spiritual healing. And so it's called Soul Camp. I think they stopped doing it, but it was like a really fun, like kind of like you had games, you had teamwork, you had all the things that you think about adult sleepaway, like a sleepaway camp, but as an adult, you know.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I love that. That to me is just like so interesting and also so oddly touching. Like it makes me emotional. I'm like, that's so beautiful that they did that, you know, like that brings me so much joy.
Yeah. And I think as a romance novel, it could be like a perfect bubble for forced proximity. You know?
Exactly. And this is my first book trying strangers to lovers. So it works, the setting lends itself really well to that, because there's just this immediate bond and sort of intimacy that comes from the fact that you've uprooted your whole life and you suddenly are like living in the mountains with people. And that's why as kids, people that go to sleepaway camp, it's like the thing, you come back renewed and you've made all these camp friends and you have this whole life that's separate from your other life. And then I was like, well, what if it's 30-year-olds doing that? You know, what does that look like when you're in your 30s and you just go up to the mountains for a week and kind of get swept away?
Love this. All right. So you have some book recommendations. You have any books to recommend our listeners to pick up?
I do. So I have been reading this year. I've made a really conscious effort to read each month a non-romance book, because I read so much romance and it almost like my reader brain starts to turn into writer brain, and it helps me to like switch genres to just keep the stories from being work to me and being the joyful, amazing comfort reads they're meant to be. So my first recommendation is a memoir, Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. It is incredible. It's very tough. I mean, there's a lot of content that if you death and like extended prison stays and a lot of like family complicated family dynamics, but what I've gravitated toward as a reader is just like really sharp, crystal clear voice. And Ashley's voice in this book is just knocks you out. And like the first page, I had to put the book down and I was like, I have to really sit with this one. So if you're in the mood for something like that, definitely Somebody's Daughter. And then if you're looking for light, but also very deep and very insightful middle grade, I just read Zia Erases the World by Bree Barton. And it's about a girl who she doesn't realize it, but she's developed depression, an 11-year-old girl, and she's come up with a word for it. And she gets this magic dictionary where she can erase words from existence. And when she erases the words, it erases their whole role in the world. So she erases the word fear. So she'll no longer fear her depression. And there's all kinds of ramifications. But again, just that like crystal clear voice, and that really there's like a wittiness and such a sharp perspective, but then just the gut punch of like life lessons and just kind of bowls you over and knocks you out. But then in terms of like romance, which I do read a lot of, I have just read back to back both of Kosoko Jackson's books, I'm So Not Over You and A Dash of Salt and Pepper, which A Dash of Salt and Pepper is not out yet, but he is such a hilarious writer, and his voice comes through, or the voice of his characters comes through in a way that is so unique, and it's just so engaging, and reading it is like just a drink of cold water, a breath of fresh air. It's so refreshing, and they're lovely, lovely books, and I cannot recommend them enough.
Oh my gosh, I love these recommendations. So
yeah, I'm like hitting you. We're going all corners here. And I am currently reading, I'm not done with it, but I know it's going to be great. I'm reading I Kissed Shar Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. And so I've got YA there. So we've got memoir, middle grade, YA, and romance. So we're covering all corners. But again, the same thing, Casey's voice so just comes through. And that's what I've just been really pulled toward as a reader.
I love this. All right. Tell us where you can find you online.
You can find me really primarily on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Bridget J. Morrissey. And then I'm on Twitter, but I'm not. I don't even have it on my phone anymore. I check it on my browser like once a week. So if you really are desperate, you could find me there, but it might take a second. And then my website, which is www.bridgetjmorrissey.com.
Thank you, Bridget, for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support this podcast. For a list of books mentioned and other romance recommendations, please visit WhatToReadNextblog.com. The What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.